One. Welcome to another episode of Persuasion, the Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and I am really excited to be introducing you today to Tina Greenbaum. And our topic is going to be how to negotiate your confidence so that you can show up as a confident negotiator. And for those of you who don't know Tina is the founder and CEO of Mastery Under Pressure. It's a coaching program for really high-performing executives. And the Mastery Under Pressure gives CEOs and senior level managers additional professional and personal tools, not only to excel, but to empower their team and their associates. And as a licensed psychotherapist and a professional sports therapist, she's got a long understood that being good at your profession doesn't make you good at your job. Her ability to give high-performing executive the skills they need to work with any corporate culture has made her California's #1 optimal performance specialist. So welcome, Tina. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Cindy. So great to be here.
And I thought we would start because, Tina and I met recently, and she talked about the fact that she'd written a book on, sort of negotiating and confidence building, which really, obviously, for those of you who know me, piqued my interest immediately. And for those who want to go check it out, the book is called Mastery Under Pressure. It's on at least its second edition already, I think, Tina, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so make sure to Google and check that out. But I thought a great starting point would be to talk a little bit about why women do tend to, certainly more than men, maybe suffer sometimes in the confidence department or lose confidence in themselves. What is your thoughts about that?
I think that's the operative question, isn't it? Why do we women behave in a certain way under pressure, and particularly around negotiating? So women have certain characteristics where, in general, this is very, very generalized, but historically, we are service-oriented, we are caretakers, we are empathic, we want to help people. And we feel a lot what other people feel. And so these are really great nurturing characteristics to have. And at the same time, if we don't have really good boundaries with them, we kind of go over and lose ourselves. Mm-hmm. So there's a wonderful saying called codependency. Codependency is I feel what you feel. And when we're negotiating, we want to be aware of what somebody else might be feeling. But we don't want to feel what they feel and come down to the same level or perspective that perhaps they are.
I love that distinction. Go a little deeper on that. I think that's a really important distinction. I often talk as well about the importance of bring emotion to your negotiation to the extent of understand your deep why, but don't be emotional in a negotiation. And this is a different spin on that. I love that idea about feeling, understanding what the other person is, but draw that distinction for us again. Super powerful.
Okay. So one of the exercises that I do in one of my workshops, which is called How to Be a Confident Negotiator, I have 3 different scenarios. So let's imagine that the first person that you are negotiating with, you are attempting to sell them something, and you know that they don't have any money. You already know that up front. And so I have people kind of tune in. How does that feel? And where do you go with your negotiating principles? Because there are certain principles in negotiation. Okay. The second one is that you have somebody in front of you who you know has a lot of money. And then how does that make you feel? And how does that change, or perhaps not change, what it is that your bottom line is when you're negotiating? And then the third scenario is you have no idea how much money that person has. And so when people do this, they're all over the place. Oh, they don't have any money, so I have to lower my fee. But a lot of money, I have to raise my fee. Or I don't know how much money we have. What do I
do? Love it.
So the way that I teach it is from perspective. Mastery under pressure is a mind and a body experience. So we want to have a very quiet body, so our mind is very clear. And if we're not in charge of our emotions, and it doesn't mean that we don't feel, we just don't have to act out on them. And a lot of this, honestly, I have to admit, is from my own experience in terms of really learning how to be a good negotiator.
Yeah.
I am one of those people. I feel what you feel.
Yeah.
I'm very, very, very empathic. I can jump into your skin. And so when I started, I've been in my own business for 30 some years. And when I started out, and money was always kind of an issue in my, not kind of, money was an issue in my family. We never knew how much money we had, because when my father wanted something, we had money. When he didn't want to spend it, we didn't have money. And so I had a lot of my own craziness around money. And I noticed really early on that it was showing up in my negotiation. And if I was coming from a desperate place, like, you can't break this appointment, I need your money. I mean, obviously I would say that, but energetically, I would come across as desperate.
Yeah.
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Yeah.
How was that, right? So I started to really, again, observe, how am I in this negotiation? My ex-husband was an amazing negotiator. He had a deadpan face. You never knew what he was thinking. He had some very clear rules for himself, that he would never make a major purchase on the spot, because he was very, very careful about his impulsivity and not wanting to buy on emotion. And so I learned a lot from watching him. I learned a lot from watching myself. And one of my great examples, there was a woman who was doing this training, and I thought she was phenomenal. And I thought, I'd really like to have a private session with her. And so I asked her, how much does she charge? She said, $500 an hour. She said, and if you can't do that, she says, I have my book, I have this, I have that, I have other people that I can refer you to. She didn't blink an eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't blink an eye. And I know that so many women, and again, from my own history of having to correct that, I was, maybe I could lower my price.
Yeah.
Maybe I could, for you.
I love it.
So,
And when you touch on you're really hitting on a number of things here. So just to break it down for a moment, because when you talk about growing up and that issue about money with your dad, boy, did that resonate with me. I got to tell you, because growing up, Tina, I grew up in a low rental apartment. There wasn't a lot of money. I remember a lot of fights around money in our household. I remember my parents always hiding money from each other, and then one of them would find it to be an issue. And so you end up growing up with a lot of money baggage. And the one thing I've found in my coaching and working with women as well, I think most women tend to carry a lot of money baggage. So I'd love for you to speak to that. How much of an impact do you think that has on how we show up as negotiators, how we show up in terms of our confidence?
Oh, I think it has everything to do. And I have to say, it's not just for women. Honestly, this piece, depending on the household that you grow up in, and many years ago, I did training with Harbecker, and he would call it your blueprint for money. And I have learned also, I can listen to somebody, and in a very short period of time, I already know kind of what that blueprint is.
Yep.
Because there's a wonderful saying that whatever the thinker thinks, the prover will prove.
Mm.
So if I don't think I have the money,
yes,
I don't have the money.
Yeah.
And if I think that this other person cannot afford my services,
Yeah.
I will unravel myself and bend over backwards to get that sale. But then I'll walk away and say, what did I do? I worked really hard to earn the money that I earned to buy the services that I paid for. And why am I not asking somebody to do the same? So that kind of comes into that confidence piece too. Like, what do I deserve? I've been doing what I've been doing for over 30 some years. Do you have any more experience in what you do than what I do? Why should I be paid less for my services, my education, all the money and time and energy and effort that I've put in? Why should I demean myself and not charge what the market charges? I'm not saying going crazy and being an extortionist, but if the market is charging a certain fee, I deserve that fee. And if I was just a beginning person, I didn't deserve the same fee.
I love it.
A lesser fee.
Yeah. And it goes back to that woman that really resonated with me as well. The one who you admired because she stood in that $500 without blinking and offering other alternatives as if it was the most obvious thing. And it fits so well with my flow. Like I have what I call the R-FIT model that, sort of the 6 key traits of a negotiator. And the A, it's like R-FIT because it's assertiveness, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust. And that really spoke to me about that assertiveness piece, because people mistake assertive with aggressive. To me, what you described about that engagement with that woman so perfectly describes assertive. It's just standing in an absolute assertiveness is really just standing in a place of confidence. And that confidence comes from knowledge, and that knowledge comes from preparation, right? When you have that certainty in what you offer, you're able to show up in that assertive place, and people will buy into that and be attracted to it. So what are your thoughts on
One
that?
of the things I love about assertiveness, I do a lot of training around communication.
Yep.
And if we are aggressive, and this is the flip side of the woman who gives away herself. This is the one who has all this masculine energy and is this sort of, you can't see, kind of what I'm doing, but I'm kind of pointing at you. And I have this sort of, nobody likes to be sold anything. And it's that sense that, I've got you, sort of. And when you do that, the other person on the other end, no, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And when it comes to an argument, no, you don't have me, I have you, it's not my fault. It's not my fault, it's your fault. And so again, we can listen to conversations and the way people are interacting and already have a very good clue about how they feel about themselves, how they feel about what they're doing, all the kinds of things, back to that same example. So when you are assertive, I like to say, you have a 50% chance of success. If you're non-assertive, you have a 0.
Nice. I love that. That's beautiful.
Right? So it kind of leads to a lot of the stuff that I do around sports psychology and people kind of focusing on the outcome as opposed to the process.
Yeah.
Which goes back again to sort of that desperate place.
Yes.
I need to get this amount of money, for this particular service. And that energy alone, again, 7% of what we say gets taken in as our words. I'm sure you know this, 93% is body language and tone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have this sort of, I need to make this sale, I've got all these, I've got data, and people are analyzing, and how many calls did I make today? And how much of this did I do? And so there's a lot of pressure. But if we focus on, I need to make the sale, we have now given away a lot of our potency to what it actually is that's actually going to create the sale.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I love, Tina, when you were talking before as well, and tied to this about that desperation, the flip side of that, when you were saying that if the inner chatter in your mind is, I can't justify this rate, or they're not going to be able to afford it, our brain gives us it tries to give us what it thinks we want. So when we have this negative self-talk, our brain goes looking for examples of it to prove us right. So showing up with that mindset, that absolute confidence, is so important. So I'd love you to speak about what are some ways you can prepare for negotiations to increase your confidence.
Right, because I think confidence is a word that a lot of us don't really understand. How do we actually feel confident?
Yeah.
I remember I started a program with my husband, who teaches tennis, and he went out there and he was talking to one of his kids. He's got to be confident. You got to be aggressive. And great, Fred. They don't have a clue how to do it. I know how to teach you how to do it. So confidence is built on little successes. Little successes. If we have an expectation of ourselves that is out of our realm of ability, and we want to be perfect and we want to get it all right, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but the reality is we're kind of a beginner. And so if the expectation is over here, again, you can't see me, but it's like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 inches away from my other hand. And the reality is in the other hand. I'm going to have frustration and disappointment in between. So you said it, you put the nail on the head. This is negotiation is a skill. It's practice and repetition, practice and repetition, practice and repetition, and giving yourself the freedom to be a beginner. Practice with a friend, to have somebody kind of come up with every kind of objective that you could possibly imagine. And then being able to be aware enough of yourself that you can pay attention to what's happening internally. We want to appear confident. We're not always feeling it.
So
but
true.
If we put on our big girl pants, and that Amy Cuddy, kind of posture. I always have people get into the mountain pose, in yoga, where your legs are strong and your arms are strong and your energy center, your tantien, your pelvic area and your abdomen, that's your power center. So if you're not feeling powerful, spend a few minutes before you walk into a negotiation, ground yourself, get your feet on the floor, and then tune into that power center. I can do that.
Love it.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that confident negotiator practices not only the verbal skills, but the internal skills of how do I settle myself down? Right before we got on, I was afraid I was going to be a few minutes late because my son just called me that he got a job, a big job. And he was so excited, and how he prepared himself. He says, every time I've had an interview, I walk away and say, I should have said that, and I should have said this. And he said, this time I said exactly what I wanted to say.
Oh, nice. Nice. Beautiful. Right? Yeah. And I love when you talk about that, the sort of mountain pose and grounding yourself, because I know Amy Cuddy sort of, it took off, it exploded, this idea about her work on the power pose. And I'm sure that's something you've been teaching before that even became such a big hot item. I mean, it amazed me that everybody thought that was such a revolutionary idea, right? But at least it's got traction now. I think there's value. And I love that you talk about practice, because I often say as well, like, don't be afraid to go to a yard sale for heaven's sakes. And don't be afraid, try different skills, like try negotiating, see what kind of reaction you get and what your comfort level is when you ask for an outrageous reduction. Be prepared to practice walking away and maybe coming back or not, like finding ways to practice so that this becomes more comfortable. And it goes back to your thing about be prepared to be a beginner. If you look at the confidence competence loop, go practice with a friend, as you say, go practice at a yard sale, because, and even if you feel that you fail or fall flat on your face, I always encourage, have a failibration, right? Like there's no such thing as a failure unless you don't learn the lesson from it. That's our gorgeous opportunities to learn and to grow. And with that, you get the confidence. And with that confidence, you try a little bit more, which gives you more competence. And with that competence, it gives you the confidence, which means, and that then you spiral upwards. So I love your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I forget, it was on Udemy, and one of my other sons and I listened to this thing on negotiation. It was a guy in England. I don't even remember his name. And he used to go, you just wait for the, oh my God, that price, I can't even, that is low or too high, or, he says, you always wait for that. We always say, he says, you got him, he says, that's your bottom,
I love it. And you sort of touched on this a bit, but how does confidence show up? Like, and I love your description about how you can start to step into it, like doing the mountain pose, getting yourself grounded, being really intentional about feeling it. And then how does it show up?
It shows up that you feel in charge, basically. One of the things I learned in one negotiating class, you're the one that is, posing the questions. You're the one that is kind of, going first in certain things. You're waiting for certain kinds of answers. When you've done it enough times, you have a sense about how it's going. even if somebody is pretty deadpan. And internally, if you have your own bottom line, and that was one of the things that I learned, from a lot of the training, I'm willing to walk away.
Yeah.
That is honestly the key.
Yeah.
That you can't want something so badly, or you can, but if you do, then you have to be willing to acknowledge that to yourself. I'm willing to give it away. It's okay.
Yeah.
You give yourself permission to do that.
So important, Tina. It's funny. One of my models, I call it no fear negotiating. You can tell I love acronyms. It's just that FEAR, right? No fear, no ego. And the A is attachment. Exactly what you're just saying. Never be so attached to that end outcome that you continue to negotiate past the point when it makes sense for you anymore. And so many people fall into that trap. So I'm really glad that you raised that issue.
Well, I think part of it is, again, coming back to reality. Okay, so if there's something that I really want and I cannot get it for the price that I want, I kind of sort of have a thing for, I say to well, maybe it just wasn't the right thing for me, or it's not the only house in town.
Yeah.
Or something that there's a wonderful saying that Wayne Dyer says, there's a spiritual solution for every problem. And there really truly is, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be.
Yeah.
The other thing that I also say, Cindy, is sometimes I choose to give away my services for a very, very, very low price. But it's a choice.
Yes.
And I always say I'm kind of like Robin Hood. I take from the rich and give to the poor. If I'm, being able to command my fee, and my own personal needs are taken care of, because otherwise, again, we give, and then we turn around. It's like, I can't pay my rent, buying drinks for everybody. It's like, oh, I can't afford to do that, So I'm very careful about making sure that my own personal safety and security are met. And then I'd like to say, sometimes I just feel called.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody will give me a story.
Yeah.
And I can't explain it, who, why, when, whatever. I just feel called.
Yeah.
And then I choose to lower that price.
I love that. And it's interesting because that goes so much of what we talk of. There's such parallels there. That's when I was said that our fit, that I is intuition. And it's so valuable. I think somewhere along, we used to trust our intuition so deeply. And as women in particular, I mean, it's, we refer to it as women's intuition for a reason, but I think as we continue to define the definition of success based almost exclusively on a masculine model, I think women and men, frankly, both stepped away from their feminine, if you will, and included stepping away from trusting their intuition. And it's so valuable. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, it's one of my favorite topics. And because I've always been very intuitive, but always not trained to use my intuition the way that I could use it professionally. So as I started to, you can get these sort of the idea that I've done a lot of personal growth work.
Which I love. I love it. I think that never ends in life.
No, it never ends. And whatever I learn, I then teach. So one of the things I learned is in my younger years, again, because of having a sort of a very difficult father, I did a lot of pleasing.
Yeah, you're not alone.
House, and he wasn't in a good mood, and so I would, oh, Daddy, can I get you this, or so I always wanted his approval. And when I started doing these personal growth trainings, somebody called me an approval suck. Oh, it wasn't very pretty, but it was true. It was true. And this one particular training that I did really, really, really early on, when personal growth trainings were just kind of new and very raw. And they had, excuse me, one exercise and there were 300 people in the room, and you had to go and find the person in the room. Now, this is probably the third day of the training, so you had an opportunity to know these people somewhat, and find the person in the room that you were most attracted to. Okay, so I find this guy that I was really attracted to, and he seemed friendly and whatever, and there was a big crowd of people around him, and And then you had to tell him or that person why you were attracted to them, which I did. And then they turned it to, you had to find the person in the room that you were least attracted to. And the person I was most attracted to found me as the one he was least attracted to.
Wow, what a ruthless, brutal workshop. Good Lord, talk about being stripped raw and vulnerable.
But what he said was so valuable, and this is 30 years ago, and I still remember it. He said, you know, you're always so friendly, you're so sweet, you're so, basically was telling me really inauthentic, not real. And I said to myself, I said, I want my inside self and my outside self to be the same.
Beautiful.
I want to be in alignment, you know.
Yeah.
If I'm upset with you and I, you know, choose to say that, I want that to be real. And so this goes back to your question about intuition. So I started to play a game with myself, and I would recommend this to anybody who wants to do this, because I think you'll find it incredibly revealing. I just made a decision that whatever that little voice in my head said, I was going to do. It's cold. Take a sweater.
Yeah.
You know, take an umbrella. It's going to rain. You better make that call before you walk out, because then blah, blah. And so every time that little voice would show up, I would follow it. And invariably, if I hadn't taken the sweater, it was going to be cold.
Yeah.
If I hadn't taken the umbrella, it was going to be raining. And every time I don't pay attention to it, it smacks me right in the face.
Yes. So true. So true.
And so the more you practice, the more tuned in you're going to become. Because everything that I talk about, Cindy, and I know you from the things that you're saying as well, you have to become aware of your own behavior and your own thoughts and your own feelings. It all starts with a level of awareness. Now, again, mindfulness now is the big, you know, it's a big term. It's an ancient practice. And it's, and for anybody who wants to write down the definition of the one that I find the most helpful, it's being aware in the present moment without judgment.
I love that. And just piggybacking on that, because I think this is such an important subject, Tina, and raising that awareness, and tied to that, intentionality, right? Like be intentional about how you show up and who you want to show up as, and you know, how, whether it's being vulnerable, and be intentional about, as you say, trusting your intuition. Even like at every element of negotiation, I find to be the most effective negotiator, even and especially negotiating with yourself. It starts with that awareness and intentionality. I think it's so powerful. And I want to thank you for sharing that story and being so vulnerable as well, because that really reinforced what we were talking about earlier, that idea about that fear of rejection or fear of failure that holds us back, when in fact, that's one of the most valuable lessons you ever received. It was a life-changing lesson for you in terms of how you show up.
You know, and the other thing about feedback is it is incredibly valuable. And the quicker the feedback, the more valuable it is. And so let's just say that you go out there and, you know, you have a big deal that you're negotiating, and it just doesn't pan out the way you want it to. Now, again, if it panned out great and everybody say, great, you did a good job, but you may not even know why you did such a good job. And so if you go back and things don't go quite as well, what did I do? Where did it fail? What was I feeling inside? Where did I lose myself? Where did I lose, you know, and really, really, really be a student of your own behavior.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that's beautiful and really important. And again, for all our listeners out there, this is one of those episodes. I mean, as Tina's talking, it's just golden nuggets dropping from the ceiling here. So I really encourage you to re-listen to this episode. This is one of those episodes you're going to want to come back to and read again, because you're going to hear it differently at different points. But there's also just so much valuable information sort of even between the lines. And I love that idea about exploring that immediate feedback with yourself. And also when you have what you perceive as a failure or a setback, to immediately take it and sort of hold it up to the light as if it's a crystal, and sort of turn it around, if you will, sort of metaphorically, and watch the light hit it and see how you can look at it different ways, get different perspectives, and squeeze every little ounce out of that experience that you can to get some benefit and some additional wisdom and better ways of showing up next time. So,
And I just want to add to that too, and give yourself permission to feel badly for a little while.
Good point. Absolutely. Yeah.
Jump right in. And that's a very male thing, to really just jump right in. And, I had breast cancer many years ago, and my brother and I are very close. And, from this background that we come from, we're survivors, we're doers. And, and he said, well, you just do this, and you just do that. And I said, give me a chance.
Yes. Let me feel.
I'll get to it.
I love that. That's so true. And thank you for that reminder, because you do. That's, I often say, just allow yourself to acknowledge the feeling. And like COVID's a perfect example of that right now. I mean, we're experiencing global grief, and for people to really give yourself permission, allow yourself to feel the full range of those feelings, allow yourself to recognize and experience the grief, the fear, the anger, whatever it is, and then once you've allowed yourself that, then get up, dust yourself off, and decide how to show up in a better state. So I love that. And it's interesting you said that's a very male thing. I'd love to hear your perspective on, do you see differences in how men and women negotiate and approach negotiations? And if so, how?
Well, men are problem solvers. For those of us who want an ear, somebody to listen to us, men don't necessarily have that. They're kind of like hunters. They're not kind of like, that's their, their history. That's the way that their brains are designed. Ours are much more conversational. And so I had a male coach, business coach, and he had a wife who was his partner. And she used to say to him all the time, leave Tina alone. Let her be a woman. Build a relationship first. So coming back to that, I want my inside self and my outside self to be the same. I have a lot of diplomacy. I love people, and I'm a very good people reader and people person. So if I'm negotiating with somebody, I want to feel them. I like to feel somebody's energy. If they look me in the eye, depending on how they shake my hand. But I may start with a little kind of small talk, kind of things like you do in an elevator, just so that, number one, I feel comfortable, and then it makes them feel comfortable. And so people buy on emotion, right? And they justify with logic.
Yeah.
So use your ability as a woman to be able to kind of tune into somebody. How's your day going? Be friendly. You don't have to be, I was going to say, an asshole. You don't have to. Sorry about that, but
I love it. Yeah.
I'm not saying that all men are like that, but they're much more to the point.
Yeah.
There's not as much chit chat. There's not as much. Again, they're not all like that. That's true.
But it's interesting, because there does a tendency, and again, I think the whole world started buying into that, both men and women, that let's get right to business, right? No small, because we're such a very to-do driven society. And it's funny, because that was one of the foundations for me that prompted me to start that sort of the art of feminine negotiation, because exactly what you've described, it's based on that very feminine approach of build rapport first, right? Like find some commonality, find a way to build rapport, bring that empathy to the table where you can put yourself truly in the shoes of the other person. And I was chuckling, if you heard, when you said about diplomacy, because that every time I hear that word, it reminds me of that quote of Winston Churchill. And it so perfectly illustrates the difference between that masculine versus feminine approach, because Churchill's quote is, diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask you for directions. And which is interesting, because I think that's the male more like, let's use diplomacy, as opposed to the more feminine approach of let's genuinely build connection and rapport here. So I love that difference. And what are some of the pitfalls, Tina, that you would say that we should avoid?
Well, number one is that desperation.
Yes.
And being focused on the outcome. The other is know who you are talking to. You know, when somebody comes to me cold, and if I'm in a position of I'm the salesperson, I'm selling my services, I can sell my services much better if I have a sense about who you are and what your challenges are, because I could help you with a lot of things. But I like to be able to zero in. So again, I would listen really carefully, because when we're anxious and we're not really trained to be fantastic listeners, listening is a skill, and it's probably your number one skill that you actually want to really practice, because otherwise you're going to be waiting for that other person to finish their sentence because you already have something, an agenda that you have that you want to get across, and you're going to miss the wires. You're going to miss.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think helps me to be good at what I do is because, number one, I listen very carefully, but I'm also very aware of when I might get distracted.
Yes.
And so I, you know, something might catch my eye or my ear or something, and then I'll come back and I've kind of lost the thread of the conversation. Just like you and I are talking, Cindy, and you know, and you're tuned into me and I'm tuned into you, and we're kind of moving in tandem. And so you have to be very, very aware of maybe you've lost it for a moment.
Yeah.
And then don't pretend that you have it. Just go back and say, you know, I just kind of missed that thing. Could you repeat that again? And so I have a motto for myself in my work. I don't ever move ahead of somebody or a different place until I'm sure that we're in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that above all, is kind of your greatest asset.
So beautiful, so beautifully put. And I want to have you dig a little more on that distraction piece, or at least draw attention to it for people, because everybody always takes that as a given. Well, of course you don't want to be distracted. And yet we don't practice that. And especially today with cell phones or whatever, like, oh my gosh, like the number of people in the middle of discussions and negotiations, both personally and professionally, who are sitting there texting and looking at their phone. It's impossible to have the level of presence and to be able to build rapport and have true empathy. And as you say, get into that sort of sync and that rhythm together, which I love that, when you're allowing yourself to be distracted. And it also doesn't signal, everybody wants to know. I mean, to me, one of the key things in negotiations, and I'd love your feedback on this, is people want to know that they've been heard, right? And that's why if you're talking too much in a negotiation, we've been conditioned to believe that the person who's talking the loudest and longest is winning. And the opposite is true. If you're talking too much in negotiation, you've brought your ego to the table, and that is the kiss of death. You want to be listening, and people want to feel truly heard and respected. And ironically, you can get better results and you'll get more when you give somebody the opportunity to feel fully heard. I don't know if you agree with that or what your thoughts are.
That's it. I mean, that's the most basic. We all want to be loved and to love and be loved. And we also want to be heard.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, you nailed it, Cindy. I mean, that is the key number. If you think about, or anybody who's listening thinks about times that they feel hurt or angry or, you know, kind of not in sync, it's because you haven't been heard.
Yeah.
That kind of comes back to a whole bunch of other things that you can learn. But in the program that I teach and what I created is I teach focus, relaxation, dealing with negative self-talk, how to visualize, which is another thing that goes into preparation, and then how to deal with fear and using it as your greatest friend. And so when you have these skills, this toolbox, you can take a reading on yourself. How am I doing? You know, just I'm sitting and you know, we're negotiating, but at the same time, I can also witness and notice how I'm doing. Where are my thoughts? Where, you know, if I'm racing well ahead of this person, I've missed something. Focus. It's practice again.
Yes.
Notice when you're in focus, when you're out of focus, how to bring yourself back into focus. Because the other thing is, a really great performance comes from deep focus.
Nice. And I love that you call it a performance. Can you speak more to that? Because I think that's a gorgeous point. I love that.
Well, I think about negotiation as a performance.
I
I need
love
all
that.
the skills that I just talked about. If I'm getting ready to have a big negotiation with somebody, I'm going to prepare. Not only do I know this person, do I know what they're looking for, do I, as much as I can learn, I'm going to prepare myself. So using visualization, imagining that I'm sitting there, imagining maybe I'm starting to get anxious. Oh, I'm just going to take a nice deep breath and I'm going to ground myself. Whatever I need to do so that I prepare. Again, when you visualize ahead of time, you've already done it. That's why it's so important to practice, in the, having a friend and making those corrections and those objectives. And so what do we want from a performance? Well, we want to have good energy. Everything is energy. And if somebody is kind of sitting back and they're just kind of,
yeah, that's true.
I'm not really terribly interested in what you're talking about. Well, I'm just going to want to get up and leave,
That's so good.
Right. And it's also for anybody that's taking speaker training, I've had a lot of training as a speaker. It's all the same things, reaching out, getting eye contact, your audience, this person is your audience at this particular moment in time. Or maybe you have a whole room full of people that you're making a presentation to and you're negotiating. So it comes back over and over and over again, Cindy, to the things that you're teaching, the things that I'm teaching. It's really preparing yourself, knowing what it is that you're going for, having a respect for the art of negotiation, that it is a skill, having the respect for yourself, for the person that you're with, that you come in prepared. There's just so many pieces to it that it's not just when you practice enough, then it becomes,
yeah,
no biggie.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was so loaded with it. It's funny because I was going to ask you, what would you say are your top 3 tips for our listeners on how to up level your confidence? But you just gave us infinitely more than 3. And I want to remind our listeners again, go check out Tina's book on mastery under pressure. And Tina, I understand you've got a white paper and also it sounds like a really interesting quiz, a peak performance quiz that you're prepared to share with our listeners. So can you tell us a bit about that? And we'll make sure to put the links in the show notes so everybody can access those.
So our white paper is called Special Corporate Preview. And it talks a lot about the process of coaching and the value of coaching and how many people think sometimes that, well, I got it together, but we can always learn. So there's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful paper on that. And then the peak performance quiz is all about all those things that I talked about: focus, relaxation, dealing with negative self-talk, how to visualize, dealing with fear. And you can get your scores. Where do I sit on a scale of 0 to 10? I have 4 questions for each one of those topics. And then if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk to you.
Okay, that's beautiful. And we'll make sure again, everybody, to have the links for both of those in the show notes. So make sure to take advantage to click on that. And Tina, if I can just ask you as we're wrapping up here, we could go on for ages. I'm going to have you back and we'll have to do a follow-up. What's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? It could be on negotiation or confidence or something completely unrelated.
First thing that comes to mind when you ask that is learning how my mind works.
Nice.
Kind of a funny thing, but as a Toastmaster, anybody that's been a Toastmaster, it's a international speaking club. And one of the things that part of the program is they call table topics. So somebody is the table topics master and they make up a bunch of questions and they say, it's a beautiful day and you just got the day off of work and Cindy.
Oh, wow. That's gorgeous.
And so I learned that the way that my mind works, and everybody has to learn from themselves because we're all different. As soon as I hear one thing, just exactly what I just did when you just asked me that question, first thing that came to mind is sitting in the first image that I got was learning how my mind worked. And that's what I went with.
I love it.
So again, it's learning to trust yourself, getting to know
Yes.
yourself. And that, and also the question, what's in my control, what's out of my control.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. Well, this has been amazing. I'm sure everybody has got loads of value from this episode. And make sure if you want to learn more about Tina, you can check her out on Instagram, Facebook, check out her webpage as well. Her Facebook and Instagram are both Mastery Under Pressure. So facebook.com/mastery under pressure or instagram.com/mastery under pressure. You can check her out on LinkedIn as Tina Greenbaum, and on Twitter as Tina Greenbaum as well. So check both of those, Mastery Under Pressure, Tina Greenbaum, and you're going to be able to find her. And thank you so much for being here, Tina. This has been a fabulous discussion, really engaged with lots of valuable input.
Thanks, Cindy.
And so for our listeners out there, if you haven't already subscribed to our Art of Feminine Negotiation podcast, please make sure that you do so and share the podcast information, but also this particular episode with anyone that you think could really get some value from this message. And let's face it, who could not benefit from this particular issue? Showing up with confidence in life to handle your negotiations. Probably one of the most important lessons you're ever going to learn, because all of life is a negotiation. So make sure as well to join our Women on Purpose community at facebook.com/groups/Women on Purpose community. And that's a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you deserve, from the boardroom to the bedroom.